Imagine an arrogant millionaire who believes he can humiliate anyone he wants. But in the middle of a luxurious dinner, in front of 50 guests, his 5-year-old daughter suddenly begins to choke before everyone's eyes. As the entire hall plunges into panic, no one knows what to do. No one. Except the cook who had been humiliated just minutes earlier. What happens next will leave you speechless. But before we continue, subscribe to the channel now to help us share more heart-touching stories that inspire and move people. The Wardstone mansion in Newport Hills gleamed like a palace under the clear night sky. Beams of light cut across the heavens as chauffeurs lined up limousines along the driveway. A crimson carpet embraced the marble staircase, guiding guests toward towering glass doors. Inside, 3 crystal chandeliers poured liquid gold over long, immaculate tables. A string quartet filled the hall with gentle waltzes, carrying conversations in many languages. White-gloved waiters glided quietly, their glasses sparkling like tiny suns. In each arrangement, rare orchids whispered of costly perfume and a promise of perfection. It was the Wardstone Capital Founders Banquet, the most ostentatious night on Ethan Ward's calendar. Half the city's elite fought for inches of proximity to the host. Nothing suggested flaws there, for in that universe imperfections were always pushed out of sight. Ethan Ward moved like a king, smiling with the same calculation he used to close acquisitions. Behind the smile, he felt the old thrill of dominance, the certainty that everything bent to his command. Leah Ward, his 5-year-old daughter, tapped her little fork on her plate, humming a tune she had invented, happy to be near her father. She was dazzled by the glitter, not understanding why so many adults laughed so loudly for no reason. Near the kitchen, Helena Duarte watched the room through the crack in the door, counting her breaths. The steady-handed chef knew the taste of every dish in that hall, but never the comfort of belonging to it. Inside her lived a trained calm. Serve well and vanish before anyone noticed her trace. Still, a thread of nerves ran through her body whenever she had to step into the hall. That night, she was mentally reviewing oven times, meat temperatures, and the cream that needed to set perfectly. Across the room, Ethan thought only of toasts and alliances, unaware his illusion of control was about to crumble. The music rose half a tone as the first course perfumed the air with butter and thyme. Helena adjusted her apron, checked the clock, and stepped 2 paces beyond the invisible line that divided worlds. In the hall, cell phone flashes captured laughter, alliances, and promises that existed only under chandeliers. Leah balanced an olive on the edge of her plate and smiled at a waitress who secretly winked back. The maitre d' made a brief gesture for attention, and the quartet lowered its volume like an obedient tide. Ethan raised his glass, ready to pronounce the names that would seal his image beyond the market. The collective murmur receded, leaving a brilliant silence where only authority could reside. Just a few steps away, Helena discreetly checked the service, tallying forks, glances, and tables needing adjustments. She wasn't looking to be seen, only to ensure everything unfolded without flaw, as she always did. And it was precisely for that reason destiny chose this instant to thrust her, unannounced, into the center of the scene. Helena moved between the tables like a trained shadow, her steps restrained so as not to draw attention. Every detail of service was in her mind. The order of courses, the doneness of meats, the texture of desserts. In the kitchen, she was known for her near-obsessive precision, but in the hall she was only the cook. The guests hardly noticed her presence, as if she were part of the elegant furniture that upheld the evening. Ethan, laughing with a circle of investors, never even registered the figure who kept his party flawless. The laughter echoed like artificial music while Helena slipped past, quietly collecting crumpled napkins. In her heart, there was a silent pride. Even invisible, she was the one holding the spectacle together. But there was also unease, the constant reminder she did not belong to this world. She could prepare dishes that stirred any palate, but here she was nothing more than a servant. And in that contrast between perfection served and anonymity imposed, her life always balanced on a fragile edge. Leah, curious like any 5-year-old, noticed the woman in uniform moving calmly among the tables. The child's eyes followed her with interest, almost as if searching for a human refuge amid the luxury. She smiled timidly, but Helena quickly looked away, afraid of intruding or being scolded. It was as if her existence were only acceptable behind the kitchen doors, away from important eyes. While she discreetly adjusted a misplaced utensil, she felt the weight of being in the wrong place. The hall wasn't meant for her. It was meant for raised glasses and celebrated names. Still, she was there because she had to ensure nothing failed, just as she always did. Inside her, there was professional pride, but also the burden of forced silence. Each step across the polished marble felt like a risk, an invitation to unwanted attention. And it was only a matter of time before someone decided to remind her she didn't belong. In that universe, everyone seemed to follow rehearsed roles. The rich celebrated, the staff served. Helena was used to this division, but that night something felt different. The little girl's gaze still followed her, and for an instant Helena felt a sting of tenderness. It was rare for anyone to truly see her, even if it was only a 5-year-old child without social filters. But the fleeting moment of humanity dissolved quickly when she felt Ethan's eyes on her. The millionaire, regal in his tailored suit, looked at her with disapproval. In that instant, a heavy silence pressed down inside her. Something was about to happen. The smile on his lips wasn't one of approval but of mockery, and Helena braced for the blow. The entire hall seemed to shrink in seconds, as if every gaze were about to converge on her. And then what she feared most came true. Ethan Ward chose to make her visible, but in the worst possible way. The hall buzzed with animated conversations when Ethan Ward's voice sliced through the air like a blade. He sat up straighter in his chair, projecting his voice so everyone could hear. "What are you doing here? Your place is in the kitchen, not among important people." The immediate laughter of some guests rang out, quick and nervous, more to echo the host than out of amusement. Others looked away, disturbed by the scene but unwilling to oppose the most powerful man in the room. Helena felt the ground vanish beneath her. Her hands trembled, her face burned as if aflame. But instead of replying, she kept her eyes down and drew in a deep breath, bearing the weight of humiliation. It was as if all the surrounding luxury had turned even colder and more distant, a stage where she would never belong. Ethan laughed again, pleased with his own cruelty, as if reaffirming to everyone who ruled that space. The cook, meanwhile, gathered her wounded pride in silence, vowing not to let a single tear fall. Little Leah, from the height of her 5 years, watched the scene with wide eyes. She didn't understand why her father spoke that way to someone who always smiled at her in the kitchen. In her child's mind, things were simple. Helena was the woman who baked sweet cookies and told her short stories. Seeing that beloved figure ridiculed before so many people stirred in her a discomfort she couldn't name. While the adults laughed, the girl tugged at the hem of her dress, restless, wishing it would stop. But no one seemed willing to intervene. Everyone was too afraid to contradict the host. Only Leah, in her innocence, could perceive that something deeply wrong was happening. She turned her eyes back to Helena, trying to offer a timid smile of support, but the cook didn't see it. Helena remained motionless, her soul in silence, enduring the public humiliation as best she could. In that moment, even without fully understanding, Leah felt the brightness of the party had gone out. The uncomfortable silence lasted only seconds, but for Helena it felt like endless minutes. When she finally managed to move, she discreetly collected an empty plate and stepped back. Each movement felt heavy, as though the polished marble floor were draining her strength and exposing her further. She knew there was no escape. She had to remain, ensure the service, even if she was invisible to all. Or worse, visible only as a punchline. Inside, a mix of shame and anger pulsed in her chest, but she contained it with discipline. She knew that to survive in this job, she would have to swallow words and emotions along with the food she prepared. Meanwhile, the guests had already resumed their conversations, as if nothing had happened. Ethan, triumphant, took another sip of wine, satisfied with having reaffirmed his power. Little did he know that this same woman, humiliated minutes earlier, would soon have his daughter's life in her hands. Helena returned toward the kitchen with steady steps, though inside she was falling apart. Her heart pounded fast, each beat echoing the cruel words Ethan had thrown at her. Her face still burned, and she fought not to let tears betray her pain. In that room full of luxury, she had been reduced to nothing more than the woman from the kitchen. But in silence, she drew a deep breath and lifted her head, swearing she would not give him that satisfaction. It was the same strength that had sustained her through all the hard years, since the days she cooked in cheap inns. She knew she didn't have the power to confront the millionaire, but she had control over herself. And that was enough to keep her dignity intact, even if outwardly she seemed submissive. Every step she now took inside that mansion carried the memory of humiliation, but also the spark of a wounded pride, hidden, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In the hall, the party carried on as if nothing had happened. Guests toasted, exchanged smiles, and spoke of million-dollar deals and luxurious trips. For them, the humiliation of a cook was just an inconvenient detail already forgotten. Helena, however, felt as if she were carrying an invisible mark on her shoulders. Every distant laugh seemed to echo inside her, reminding her of the place they had forced upon her. At the same time, her mind sought comfort in more intimate thoughts. She remembered her mother, who always said, "Dignity doesn't lie in what others think, but in what you do." Those words sustained her, preventing her wounded pride from turning into despair. She was not just a cook. She was a woman who had learned to face life with courage. And even if no one there recognized it, she carried within herself more worth than the entire hall combined. Leah, seated beside her father, watched in silence. She didn't understand social codes, but she felt Helena's sadness as if it were her own. The girl toyed with her plate without appetite, glancing discreetly toward the kitchen. Inside her grew a silent admiration for the woman who never complained, yet always cared for everyone. It was a childlike tenderness that clashed with the cold, calculating world of the adults around her. And even without understanding, Leah knew there was something special about that cook. While Ethan bragged about his accomplishments, the girl longed to tell her father he was wrong. But her voice, small and innocent, would never have weight in that room of giants. So she kept her silence, just as Helena did, waiting for time to reveal the truth. And time, as always, would bring to light what no one expected. Sitting in her special chair, her feet dangling because they didn't reach the floor, Leah Ward observed everything with innocent attention. Her curious eyes roamed the hall, enchanted by the glow of the chandeliers and the constant clinking of crystal glasses. She smiled now and then, playing at imitating the serious expressions of the adults around her. But when she saw her father scold Helena out loud, her childish joy faded for a moment. She didn't fully grasp the weight of the words, but she sensed something cruel in them. Her little heart tightened, and for the first time that night, the party seemed less colorful. Even so young, Leah had the sensitivity to realize someone had been wronged. Her eyes followed the cook as she walked away, head lowered, as if carrying an invisible pain. Instinctively, the girl wished she could run to her, but she remained trapped in her chair, only watching. And in silence, she stored that scene in her memory, unaware of how much it would change her life. While the adults toasted and exchanged rehearsed compliments, Leah remained restless. She tapped her tiny fingers against the table, staring at her plate with little interest. Her father's words echoed in her young mind as something far too harsh to say. Helena wasn't just the cook. To Leah, she was someone familiar, who always treated her kindly. She remembered the times she met her in the hallways and received a sweet smile in return, or when she followed her into the kitchen and breathed in the comforting smell of fresh cake. All of it made that public scolding feel even more strange and unjust. Her father was her hero, but at that moment he seemed different, distant and cold. Leah couldn't explain it, but a shadow of disappointment began to grow inside her. It was a new, confusing, but very real feeling that stole a piece of her innocence. From afar, Helena also noticed the girl's fixed gaze. There was tenderness there, a purity that crossed the barrier imposed by the adults. For a moment, it brought the cook a small relief, as if she were truly seen. But she quickly looked away, aware she couldn't show anything in front of the guests. Still, that childlike gesture sustained her amid the sting of fresh humiliation. It was like a breath of hope in that heavy atmosphere of vanity and wealth. To Leah, Helena was not inferior to anyone in that hall. She was, in a way, special, and that innocent perception would become the invisible bond between them when everything changed. Because that night, Leah would not only witness injustice, she would also see justice rise from the most unexpected place, and that memory would remain engraved in her heart forever. The sound of cutlery fell silent when Ethan Ward lifted his crystal glass, calling for quiet. The string quartet slowed its pace, leaving only soft notes in the air, like a solemn backdrop. The 50 or so guests settled into attention, turning toward their host. Ethan, smiling like a man who believed he controlled the world, cleared his throat before speaking. Tonight, we celebrate not only the achievements of Wardstone Capital, but the vision that brought us here, he declared. Polite applause echoed, followed by forced admiration and approving gestures. He moved through the hall like an actor on the main stage, feeding on the attention he was given. Every phrase sounded rehearsed, filled with self-promotion and excessive pride. The guests nodded along, even as many silently wished only to finish dinner. But no one dared interrupt the ego-driven spectacle of the city's most powerful host. Leah, restless in her chair, looked around without grasping much of the speech. To her, her father's words were far too long and not at all entertaining. She fidgeted with her fingers, resting her chin on her hands, as if counting the seconds until she could leave. Her tired face reflected the boredom of a 5-year-old trapped at an adult party. Helena, in the background, watched silently, keeping close to the waitstaff. She listened to the boastful words, unimpressed. To her, those triumphs stood on the invisible labor of people who were never mentioned. It was always that way. The great reaped the glory while the small bore the weight. But this time it felt different. Her wounded pride still throbbed, making Ethan's words taste more bitter. And no matter how she tried, she couldn't shake the discomfort he had caused. The entire hall seemed to vibrate with the echo of the host's arrogance. With every phrase, the guests responded with rehearsed applause, like background actors. Ethan raised his voice, citing million-dollar figures, global partnerships, and grand futures. Yet at the back of the room, an invisible tension hovered, like the omen of something unexpected. Leah absent-mindedly nibbled a piece of meat, unaware that every innocent gesture of hers would soon matter. The waiters exchanged glances in silence, torn between duty and unease. Helena, attentive to every detail, noticed the girl's restlessness, but couldn't intervene. While Ethan raised his glass for a final toast, fate was already preparing its own intervention. It was the calm before the storm, the moment when everyone believed nothing could go wrong. And it was exactly at that peak of glory that the night began to shift course. As Ethan spoke with his chest puffed with pride, Leah Ward toyed with her plate without interest. Her fork pushed around small pieces of meat and vegetables, which she nibbled absent-mindedly. The guests kept their eyes fixed on the host, more out of convenience than genuine interest. No one noticed the 5-year-old girl, chewing slowly, lost in her own boredom. The laughter and applause at her father's speech drowned out the faint sound of her eating. With every pompous phrase Ethan delivered, the guests reinforced their false admiration. But the real drama wasn't unfolding at the center of the hall. It was at the far end of the table, almost invisible. Helena, from the kitchen doorway, watched closely, like someone guarding the unseen. She noticed the girl's small gestures, the innocence with which she shoved large bites into her mouth. It was just a detail, but a detail no one else perceived, and one that would change everything. Ethan's glass reflected the golden light of the chandeliers as he spoke of power and expansion. The hall seemed hypnotized by his voice, as if everyone were under a spell. Leah, oblivious to the spectacle, tried to balance a potato on her fork, giggling at her own game. The cook, even from a distance, felt a twinge of apprehension, though she couldn't say why. It was as if her intuition were warning her that something wasn't right at that elegant table. The waiters, trained to focus on the big picture, ignored the small gestures of the child. The investors, consumed by ambition, didn't even notice the girl's presence. Everything revolved around Ethan and his arrogant brilliance as host. But amid all that rehearsed perfection, a spark of danger was already silently burning. And no one seemed able to see it, except the woman who had been humiliated minutes earlier. Helena tightened her grip on the cloth she was holding, as if guided by a premonition. Perhaps it was the memory of all the times she had cared for Leah in the kitchen, offering her soft cookies. She knew the girl's habits, knew how easily distracted she became while eating. But now, something in Leah's expression seemed different, more absent than usual. Helena's heart raced without explanation, a silent warning she ignored so as not to draw attention. The hall, however, remained consumed by Ethan's arrogance and the rehearsed applause. Each passing second was like a grain of sand sliding down destiny's hourglass. And the cook, though not fully understanding, sensed that the moment to act was approaching. What seemed like just another business dinner was about to descend into chaos. And Leah, the 5-year-old girl, would become the center of that unexpected upheaval. Leah Ward's fork slipped from her hands when suddenly a piece of meat lodged in her throat. Her eyes widened, her breathing faltered, and her rosy cheeks began turning red. Instinctively, her small hands flew to her neck, the universal sign of distress. The elegant laughter of a group of guests stopped instantly, cut short by sudden silence. The string quartet ceased playing, the notes dying in the air like leaves ripped by the wind. Everyone turned toward the child, but no one reacted immediately, stunned by the unexpected scene. Time seemed to stop inside the glittering hall, each second growing heavier. Ethan, at the center of the room, halted his speech, unable to believe what he was seeing. The arrogance of minutes before vanished, replaced by the most primal fear, losing his daughter. In that moment, no fortune, no contract, No applause mattered anymore. Leah tried to breathe, but no air came. Her eyes were already brimming with tears, begging for help no one knew how to give. Guests stood abruptly, but froze in place, incapable of action. An elderly man murmured something in another language, while a woman covered her mouth in shock. The little girl's hands pounded against her chest in silent desperation. The millionaire, accustomed to always having ready answers, now had none. The hall, once vibrant, had transformed into a theater of fear and helplessness, and each second without action felt like an eternity tipping toward the irreversible. From the kitchen doorway, Helena felt her heart leap, her eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. It was the call she feared, and at the same time the one she could not ignore. The heavy silence was broken only by faint coughs and the muffled sobs of a few guests. Ethan rushed to his daughter, gripping her shoulders and shaking her desperately. But the girl didn't respond, still struggling in vain for air. The security guards approached, but they were as lost as everyone else. No one there, in their expensive suits and designer gowns, knew what to do. Panic spread like wildfire, consuming every face in the room. Helena, overtaken by urgency, dropped the cloth she was holding and took a firm step forward. Her mind filled with memories of first aid training she had taken years before. The humiliation no longer mattered, nor Ethan's disapproving gaze. There was only one certainty inside her. She had to act before it was too late. The Wardstone Mansion's grand hall plunged into unexpected chaos. Women in luxurious gowns screamed in despair, some covering their mouths. Men accustomed to negotiating millions now trembled, powerless, not knowing what to do. One guest tried patting Leah's back, but the gesture only worsened the situation. Others ran off in search of help, but none had any real knowledge of first aid. The chandelier's glow no longer conveyed grandeur. It only lit up fear on every face. The clinking of shattered glasses echoed on the floor, spilled in the guests' frantic rush. Chairs toppled, and the hall that once exuded perfection had become a stage of panic. Everyone knew. The girl's life was in danger, but no one had the faintest idea how to save her. Time raced on like an enemy, each second a sentence drawing closer. Ethan clutched Leah by the shoulders, frantic. "Breathe, sweetheart. Please, breathe," he pleaded, his voice breaking, so different from the arrogant tone of minutes earlier. But the girl only opened and closed her mouth in panic, unable to draw air. The millionaire felt small, useless, reduced to a desperate father watching his child suffocate. The bodyguards, used to neutralizing external threats, looked helplessly at one another. No one dared take charge, afraid of making a mistake and making things worse. The scene, lasting only moments, already felt endless. It was as if the whole world had stopped just to witness the child's suffering. The guests' eyes were all fixed on the unfolding drama, frozen in horror. And for the first time, Ethan Ward had no power over the problem consuming him. Helena watched from the edge of the hall, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could feel the wave of panic spreading, thickening the air until it was suffocating. The laughter of minutes ago had turned into screams of terror. She looked at Leah and saw not just the boss's daughter, but an innocent child begging for help. Her legs trembled, but something stronger inside her pushed her forward. It was as if a dormant maternal instinct had suddenly awakened. At that moment, it didn't matter if she would be scolded again, or if the guests despised her. What mattered was saving that little girl before it was too late. The general panic had already proven no one there had the answer, and Helena knew she couldn't wait another second to act. The powerful Ethan Ward, who minutes earlier had spoken like an absolute king, now trembled before his own daughter. He held Leah in his arms, not knowing what to do. his eyes lost as if he had fallen into another world. His once proud face was pale, drenched in cold sweat trickling down his forehead. He tried repeating her name, as if the force of his voice could bring the air back. "Breathe, baby. Please, breathe," he begged. But no response came beyond her tear-filled eyes. Each second was a dagger to his soul, a weakness he had never admitted feeling. The man who signed billion-dollar contracts now looked like a mere mortal, defeated by helplessness. The steady hands that drove his business were trembling, incapable of producing a solution. The heart, accustomed to the cold rhythm of calculations, now pounded in raw despair. In that moment, his entire fortune was worth less than a single breath of his daughter. The guests watched in heavy silence, some crying, others petrified. It was unsettling to see the city's most arrogant man reduced to such vulnerability. Some whispered, but most simply prayed in silence for a miracle. Ethan, however, noticed nothing beyond Leah's face, growing paler by the second. He tried shaking her lightly, not knowing it would do no good. A sharp chill ran through him as he realized he had no control over the situation. His mind, usually quick with solutions, was blank, incapable of thought. His eyes darted desperately, searching for someone, anyone, who could act. But the emptiness on the faces around him only deepened his isolation. It felt as though the entire world had abandoned him at the most crucial moment of his life. Meanwhile, Helena battled in silence between fear and courage. She could see Ethan's fragility like never before. The man who had humiliated her before everyone now seemed to plead for help with his eyes. It was as if he had finally stepped down from his pedestal and revealed himself as just human. Something broke inside Helena. Not out of pity, but responsibility. She knew she could wait no longer. The child's life was slipping away with each second. The cook drew a deep breath, the world narrowing to a single point. Leah. Her steps faltered for only an instant before gaining strength. It no longer mattered if her boss hated her interference, or if the guests judged her. It was time to act, for where the millionaire saw only despair, she saw the one chance of salvation. The hall was still in a trance of fear when Helena Duarte stepped forward without a second thought. Her heart pounded as if it would burst from her chest, but her steps were steady and sure. The conversations ceased entirely, and every gaze turned toward the simple figure in uniform. She knew there was no time left to hesitate. Every second could be Leah's last. Ethan's cruel words echoed in her mind. "Your place is in the kitchen," but now they sounded distant. Nothing mattered except the child choking before a room full of useless adults. Instinct spoke louder than fear, and her courage was born from the pain of humiliation. She crossed the luxurious hall like a warrior entering enemy territory, armed only with determination. The tears in the guests' eyes reflected her own urgency, and in that moment, the despised cook became the only one capable of leading. Ethan, stunned, looked up to see Helena rushing forward. His first reaction was disgust. How dare she invade the center of the room? But that resistance lasted only a second, replaced by sheer terror on his face. He saw in her eyes something he found in no one else: certainty. Helena didn't look lost, nor panicked like the others. There was an unshakable focus in her. It was as if she had been born for this moment, carrying a silent knowledge within her. Ethan, powerless, stepped aside, allowing her to reach Leah. His pride shattered into 1,000 pieces, crushed by the need to save his daughter. The guests, incredulous, parted to form a circle around the scene. The entire hall watched in silence, as if awaiting a miracle from the most unlikely hands. Helena knelt beside the girl and drew a deep breath. The world around her vanished. There was no luxury, no guests, no judgment. There was only her and Leah, bound by the invisible thread of urgency. The cook's eyes hardened with resolve, transforming fear into action. She knew exactly what to do. She had once learned it in simple community courses. She recalled every instruction, every motion, focusing entirely on the child. With steady hands, she positioned Leah properly, preparing for the maneuver. The entire hall held its breath along with the girl, as if fate itself awaited Helena's move. It was the turning point, the humiliated woman stepping into the spotlight before everyone. And nothing could stop her, for in that moment she carried the power to bring back life. Helena positioned herself behind Leah Ward with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what to do. She placed one hand against the girl's stomach, clenched the other into a fist, and pressed it just below the diaphragm. She inhaled deeply, trying to remain calm despite her racing heart. The hall was enveloped in absolute silence, everyone waiting for her next move. The cook gathered her strength and delivered the first firm thrust upward, sharp and precise. The little girl's body jolted forward slightly, but the blockage remained. Tense murmurs rippled through the crowd, and some guests covered their eyes, unable to watch. Helena stood unwavering, repeating the maneuver once more, this time with even more force. Her simple uniform contrasted with the grand, cinematic act of courage unfolding. The invisible woman had become the only hope in the room. The second thrust was stronger. Leah coughed faintly, a sign that some air was still escaping. Helena didn't stop. She knew she had to continue until the obstruction was expelled. She applied the third thrust, firmer, more determined, fueled not only by technique but human desperation. The girl's eyes widened, her body writhing in the struggle for freedom. The hall stood frozen, holding its breath alongside her. Even Ethan, who always demanded control over every detail, was now just a helpless bystander. Tears slid down the faces of guests, shaken by the dramatic scene. Each second without success felt like a crushing eternity. But Helena would not give up, because giving up meant condemning the child. It was as if the weight of her entire life had led to this decisive moment. On the fourth thrust, the miracle finally happened. A piece of meat shot out, landing on the white tablecloth beside them. The sound of Leah's coughing, air flooding back into her lungs, exploded like salvation music in the heavy silence. The hall, which had been holding its breath, exhaled in unison with relief. The girl cried loudly, gasping between tears and fresh air, but she was alive. Helena held her gently, making sure she was safe before slowly stepping back. Ethan rushed forward at once, clutching his daughter in desperation and relief all at once. The guests, still in shock, struggled to process what they had just witnessed. The woman who had been ridiculed minutes earlier had just restored the most precious life to the millionaire. And in that instant, before 50 witnesses, Ethan Ward's world began to crumble from within. The piece of meat rolled across the white cloth, leaving behind a small but symbolic stain. It was as if that fragment carried away the suffocating silence that had gripped the hall. Leah Ward gasped hard, coughing loudly, before breaking into sobs of relief. The fragile sound of her renewed breathing rang like music to everyone present. Some guests covered their faces, unable to hold back tears. Others, overwhelmed, joined in spontaneous applause that echoed under the crystal chandeliers. But this applause was different, sincere, born from the heart at an unexpected miracle. The luxurious hall, once filled with arrogance and power, now bowed to the courage of a cook. And in the midst of it all, Helena remained silent, still on her knees, ensuring the child was safe. She sought no recognition, only relief that life had triumphed over danger. Ethan, tears streaming down his face, held his daughter tightly, as if shielding her from the entire world. The millionaire who once seemed untouchable now trembled like any vulnerable father staring at loss. He kissed Leah's hair, whispering again and again, "Thank God, thank God." His tailored suit no longer mattered, stained by tears and recent despair. The guests looked at him, but more than that, they looked at Helena with admiration. The woman mocked minutes earlier had become the heroine of the night. The eyes that once dismissed her now surrounded her with respect. Every simple, steady gesture of hers seemed engraved into the memory of all. It was as if the entire hall had received a silent, powerful lesson. And that lesson came not from speeches, but from the unexpected action of the invisible. Breathless, Helena rose slowly, stepping back discreetly to avoid the spotlight. Deep down, she didn't want applause or stares. She wanted only the certainty that Leah was safe. But the clapping wouldn't stop, echoing like a wave that carried her forward. It was impossible to ignore that the night's focus had shifted entirely. Her legs trembled, not from fear, but from the shock of finally being truly seen. For the first time, she wasn't just the woman from the kitchen. She was the woman who had done the impossible. Ethan lifted his eyes to her, and in them was a mixture of gratitude and shame. He knew he would never forget this moment, or the cruel words he had spoken before. The hall still applauded, but the silence between the two spoke louder than any sound. It was the beginning of the emotional shift that would forever change their lives. Ethan still clutched Leah tightly, as if the embrace could erase the terror they had just lived. His chest rose and fell in uncontrollable sobs, and the pride that once defined him seemed dissolved. When he finally lifted his eyes, they met Helena Duarte's, still standing only a few steps away. It was as if the entire hall vanished for a moment, leaving only the three of them. The memory of his cruel words, "Your place is in the kitchen," echoed in his mind like a punch. Now, before the woman who had saved his daughter, those words felt monstrous. The millionaire felt the weight of shame heavier than he ever had in his life. Every clap that still rang out sounded to him like a silent accusation. What he felt wasn't just gratitude, but profound remorse. In that instant, Ethan realized he was not nearly as powerful as he had always believed. The guests, moved, watched the scene without daring to interrupt. Some whispered about the irony of life, the most arrogant man being saved by the very person he had humiliated. Others simply cried in silence, touched by the contrast between power and humility. Leah, recovered but still sobbing, looked at Helena with pure, childlike affection. She stretched out her tiny hand toward the cook, as if silently asking for a hug. Helena hesitated, unsure if she could approach under so many watchful eyes. But the girl's tearful gaze was an invitation impossible to refuse. The cook stepped closer, knelt, and held Leah's hand tenderly. The entire hall sighed at that simple gesture, filled with profound meaning. It was the purity of a child recognizing, before everyone else, the true heroine of the night. Ethan wiped his tears, but couldn't hide the emotion stamped on his face. He took a hesitant step forward, as if carrying the weight of 1,000 apologies. For a moment he thought of remaining silent, but his conscience no longer allowed it. He knew he had to acknowledge the greatness of the woman he had despised. His voice came out trembling, broken by the sobs he tried to contain. I wronged you, Helena. I will never forget what you did for my daughter." The murmurs among the guests grew louder, but no one dared laugh or criticize. The millionaire's vulnerability was too genuine to be questioned. Helena, humble as always, simply lowered her eyes and stroked Leah's hair. In that instant, Everyone understood something greater had happened. An irreversible transformation. The silence in the hall was almost solemn as Ethan Ward stood, his eyes still wet. He adjusted the jacket wrinkled from desperate embraces, but his posture was no longer proud. It was the posture of a man stripped of masks, exposed before everyone who knew him. He drew a deep breath and, with a wavering voice, spoke loudly enough to echo beneath the chandeliers. I humiliated this woman, and I was wrong. Today, before all of you, I acknowledge that Helena Duarte saved what I hold most precious. The words cut through the air, leaving the guests in absolute silence for several seconds. It was unthinkable to see the arrogant millionaire publicly admit guilt, but there he was, broken and human. Some exchanged glances of surprise. Others discreetly wiped away tears. Helena, embarrassed, lowered her eyes, unsure how to react to such an unexpected confession. She had not sought applause, but in that moment, she could no longer prevent what came next. The entire hall rose in a standing ovation, as if witnessing something historic. Guests clapped loudly, some moved, others ashamed for having laughed earlier. It was a mix of gratitude, admiration, and collective regret. Helena stood still for a moment, stunned by the public recognition. The applause wasn't just for her, but for the lesson her actions had taught. Leah, still clinging to her father, smiled as she saw the cook finally honored. The girl tugged at Ethan's arm, insisting, "Daddy, clap too." The millionaire, tears streaming down his face, joined the chorus, applauding the woman he had once scorned. And that simple yet sincere gesture marked the end of a cycle of arrogance. It was the beginning of a new way of seeing the true worth of people. Helena took a deep breath, her heart racing. She had never imagined being at the center of such a moment. Her hands still trembled, not from fear, but from the impact of a memory she would never forget. Her eyes met Ethan's again, but this time there was no bitterness. There was only a silent recognition that, somehow, life had proven her right. The hall continued applauding, and for the first time Helena did not feel invisible. The weight of humiliation had been replaced by the honor of respect. She had not sought glory, but she had received something far greater, dignity in front of all. And as the applause echoed beneath the golden chandeliers, she understood the strength of humility. It was proof that greatness can come from the most unlikely places. The gala hall, once a stage of ostentation and vanity, now vibrated on a different frequency. No longer were million-dollar deals or grand figures the subject of conversation. It was Helena Duarte's name, repeated in tones of admiration and respect. The woman who had been humiliated minutes earlier now walked the hall as a heroine. The eyes that once passed through her as if she were invisible now rested on her with reverence. Some guests approached to thank her, others only smiled quietly, still emotional. Helena, humble, kept herself discreet, reminding herself she had only done what was right. But deep down she knew that night would never be forgotten, neither by her nor by those who witnessed it. Even the air felt different, as if the mansion itself had breathed relief along with Leah. Ethan Ward, humbled and grateful, understood that his world would never be the same again. For Leah, that night would not be remembered for the fright, but for the act of courage. She would always remember the cook who saved her and made her feel safe. In the little girl's heart, Helena was no longer just the kitchen lady, but a true friend. And every smile they shared carried the promise of an eternal bond. Ethan, for his part, had learned the hardest and most necessary lesson of his life. He discovered that power and money could not buy the true worth of people. He realized arrogance is fragile, and dignity is born in the simplest places. Before the guests, He declared he would never again underestimate anyone for the work they did. And his words, unlike before, sounded sincere, flowing from a transformed heart. In that moment, everyone knew. This was not just a dinner, but a story of redemption. Helena, with discreet tears, returned to the kitchen where she felt at home. She needed nothing more than the certainty she had done what was right. But the truth was that, even away from the spotlight, she had already left her mark on everyone in that room. Her gesture would echo as memory and lesson for each person present. And each would carry away the silent but powerful truth. Never underestimate someone for the position they hold. For true worth lies in character, courage, and humanity. Later that night, Leah fell asleep in her father's arms, safe, saved by the heart of a humble woman. Ethan cast one last glance toward the kitchen, certain that day had changed his life forever. The arrogant millionaire had been defeated not by strength, but by humility. And so, the Wardstone mansion gained its greatest story, the story of a cook who proved she was so much more. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any new videos, and of course, leave a like. It truly helps us keep bringing you more emotional stories that can change lives. Thank you so much for your support.